Hello. Wow. Well, I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you for giving your Sunday. I'd first like to thank a few people. Is Ren here from the State Department? Is he here? If he isn't, it's really a privilege, because I have a long history with the State Department, working for peace among nations. A few years ago, I got to work in a project to bridge peace between Palestinian and Israeli children using storytelling, so they tell their own stories. Another State Department grant called Bridging Stories, I'm also going to show you, to bridge peace and reconciliation and understanding between Armenia and Turkey. So when I got this email to be here with you all, I realized I needed to be here. I just got here only 10 hours ago, and I'm literally here 24 hours, and I'm on a plane tonight again at about 1 in the morning. So thank you for being here. You're very, very kind. Also, Timur, if he's here, I don't know if you know these, there he is, was very integral and kind to consider me to be a part of this, so thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk to you about empowering ourselves and empowering our collective humanity through visual communication. And to begin with, though, I was asked, I guess, to come here because I do have connections to this part of the world. I did a story for National Geographic, part 6 of the Out of Eden walk. I traveled throughout the entire Mangostau region of Kazakhstan, and then I traveled completely overland through all of Uzbekistan last year. I guess I also have a connection to the stands because I'm also a Stanmeyer, so I have a verbal connection to it as well. And I've worked throughout many countries in the region, from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and the Caucasus. So I just thought I'd start. I should get out of the way. Just a little bit of a touching of what I've done here in this beautiful part of the world that you are all from. This was a National Geographic story. Well, so the story was traveling the ancient Silk Road, which of course, a lot of photographers do, right? But it was really looking at what is the Silk Road today, because it is the traversing of still goods and services, but no longer in caravans. They're in trucks. And I guess if we can't get the saturation down, just try to tone the saturation of your own eyes down, because it was not this saturated. So that's an actual copy of the magazine. But this is the story that actually ran in the magazine. Most National Geographic stories they take 2 months to make. So I traveled for an entire month through Mangostau, and then went back to DC and edited part of that story, and then went back and traveled the entire length of Uzbekistan, from the Kazakh border all the way to the Afghan border for a month. So we start off at the Caspian, and just sort of vignettes of what is this part of the world today. Unemployed oil workers, because fuel prices a year and a half ago had dropped. And even though your Aktau region is all about fuel, a lot of people were being laid off because of commodity prices, like fuel dropping. And I come into these things not setting them up. I don't set anything up. I was just stopping to get a drink in this very beautiful, strange restaurant. And here's this guy standing there in this really picturesque, teal green sofas and chairs, and just get to know them and humanize them, and learn his story, because everybody has a story. A little further in Mangostau, went to a wedding, and of course religion, and beautiful, the beauty of Islam. And then you look for these little vignettes that come up. Marilyn Monroe just happened to be there also in these beautiful settings. This is the actual image that was the lead of the Nat Geo piece. And again, you can't do a story about the Silk Road without showing a road. And so how do you make it interesting? And I just happened to stop by the side of the road. I actually loved that jacket. In Uzbekistan, in Tashkent, a double wedding. 2 brothers simultaneously getting married. the Soviet legacy. I can't remember the name of this town, but you have to look at sort of the history of this part of the world and the Soviet connections. And bizarrely enough, there's this giant airplane just sort of jettisoning out of a shopping mall. And I spent a lot of time with people. I try to stay at people's homes for a day or two. It's just daily life, the beauty of the daily life of humanity and what people do. Who are we as fellow human beings, as sisters and brothers? General street scenes. I love sort of layers of things that communicate different pieces. Wondering in the act of who are we and where are we going? The registrant. I don't do landscapes that much, but you can't go to such a magnificent place and not try to make something of meaning and purpose. A woman who had been waiting for years to have a child, and she finally had her first baby, and she celebrated with a big party because she couldn't have a child for years. A wedding, and thankfully a bird just happened to be there. After a circumcision ceremony, money being shared in gifts and offerings. And you can't do a story about the Silk Road without having silk. But this story is also, and I don't know if anybody follows the Out of Eden walk. My colleague Paul Salopek and writer, we have for the last 5 years been walking the pathway of our ancestors out of Africa. It's called the Out of Eden Walk. You can go to outofelenwalk.com. We started in Ethiopia about 5 years ago, and we have been walking overland, following in the footsteps of our ancestors that really wandered out of Africa some 50, 60,000 years ago. Paul right now is in India. We're doing what's called slow journalism, slowing down and getting to know who we are in this fabric of our collective humanity. So Paul is the official walker. He's walked about 4,000 kilometers so far. I went through the Kizilkum Desert in Uzbekistan. Anybody from Uzbekistan here? It was a 5-day, probably the most arduous part of the journey. We had no access to water or food. So I do have to photograph Paul walking. These were days and days walking through 40 degrees Celsius deserts, carrying our own supplies. We had our water stolen, our food stolen. So it's all part of the landscape of what we deal with today that our ancestor did some 50, 60,000 years ago. Whether you want to believe it or not, you may say that you're from Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan, but you can't answer really where you're from unless you really go far. So if you say, if I ask you, who's your grandmother, right, or who's your great-great-grandfather? And you're going to probably say, oh, well, they came from, Almaty or wherever. But I want to ask you, who's your grandmother or grandfather 2,700 generations ago? There weren't any Homo sapiens in this part of the world 60,000 years ago. We all walked out of a region that we call today Africa. And Paul and I are walking until we reach the tip of Argentina, which is the youngest Homo sapien bones on our planet are found, and they're only 7,000 years old. So spent a lot of time with Paul, but there's only always one picture of Paul in every story because it's really a story about all of us. We live out in the open. Some of the best sleeps I've ever had were not in 5-star hotels. In fact, I don't like 5-star hotels, but just sleeping out in the desert or under a tree. And of course, you live in probably the most spectacular part of the world where you don't have light pollution. The heavens are completely opened every night. But really why I'm here is I want to talk about how do we go and make change. How do we collectively turn the wheel of change? Because I can't do it myself. A bit of my background, I was a contract photographer for Time magazine for more than a decade. Worked on every major story. My God, these colors are bright. I worked on every major event in Asia and parts of Africa for a little over a decade, from 1990s until the mid-2000s, producing about 18 covers for the magazine. And for the last 14 years, I've almost worked exclusively for National Geographic. I've done 17 stories for them, and this year I'm doing my 18th and 19th story later this year. So what is actually, though, more important, and this is why I'm here, and maybe why Timur and Ren asked me to be here, what's more important than being published in traditional media? And I'm a little bit late to this event, so I'm sorry if what I'm going to share you guys have already been talking about. Again, I just only arrived 10 hours ago, and I'm awake. Don't worry, I had a bit of sleep. So if I'm speaking on things that all of you already know or already heard, well, I'm here to share more love, and I want to give you more fire on why we need to even relentlessly give more to what we're here for. So what's more important than being published in National Geographic and Time magazine? And I think you'll actually get it. This thing called Instagram or social media, and I want to talk to you a bit about it. I want to turn it a bit on its head. The most important vehicle that we have today is self-publishing. And I try to scream as loudly as I can on this thing called Instagram. Everybody on Instagram here? Let's hope so. I see everybody walking around staring at their phones. I see somebody on their phone right now, which is excellent. And I'm not upset. Don't worry. I want you, because this is how we're consuming today. This is where traditional media is shitting their pants and catching up, because this is how we are consuming. And we're not only consuming this way, we're creating this way. And it's incredibly empowering and powerful. So absolutely, I'm glad to hear that you guys are all on Instagram. I hope you're relentlessly on this thing called Facebook. I curate them differently. Try not to. We can talk about that later in a Q&A, if you'd like, on how I curate, and we can talk about how you curate your various social accounts or your self-publishing accounts. And of course, being on Twitter, it's about engagement. But I want to sort of kick I know this is the title of why we do this is to go viral here, but I want to turn it on its head. It's not necessarily that we're doing this to go viral, because to me that feels a little self-serving. It's not about me, and I don't want to talk about you. You want to talk however you want to, but everything I do is not about me. It's about the people that allow me into their lives, because I deal in the art of indisputable reality. And so for me, the main purpose, and I want to share that with you, is to try to remove yourself, because it's not about going viral. It's about changing the world. And it really is the monumental time in our collective humanity that we actually can. We can make it really awful for ourselves, because I can tell you, I've seen far more than I ever want to process. And I'm going to rip your heads apart here, I hope, a bit, so you can sort of feel where we are and maybe where we're going. Because, yes, I know you want to go viral, but I want you to be a giver. I want you to pour love and make change. And you only do that by the act of giving. I've seen too much. I've seen too many revolutions, too much anger and hatred. I've seen people fight for their rights, for simple things like being able to afford food, let alone to be able to vote and have a voice in what they're heard and what they feel. I've been nearly killed more times than I can count. I was going to sit on top of oh, you can't see anything here. Can we brighten this at all? Brighten and the saturation is like we're looking at the Cartoon Network here. I was actually going to walk and sit on this car because I was exhausted that day, and I was about maybe 30 meters from it, and the car just blew up in front of me, killing countless of people. I've seen people do more atrocities to themselves and to humanity than I care to process. And this cycle continues, and we have to work for change and awareness. I've seen gun culture and hatred that spills not only from adults, but into younger generations, perpetuating the evils and the weakness of humanity. Because now we can actually change consciousness. I've gone to villages where families have come back and their entire families have been slaughtered, all out of hatred and division. Bernardino Guterres was just a freedom fighter, but not a fighter at all. He had flip-flops in his hands and a rock, fighting for democracy in East Timor, until a police officer took a gun and weakly shot him in the back of his head. I've seen people desperate to vote. How many people, you guys have free elections here? I know in my country where I live, we get such a small turnout to vote. And here, people, 99% of East Timorese voted, and they were out of fear, they're so fearful to vote, they had police to escort them in for that right of democracy, to be able to choose your leaders. neglect in the healthcare system of those just forgotten through our human weakness of who we are, our sisterhood and our brotherhood. Children in Pakistan locked away, forgotten, their parents abandoning them, no place to sleep. They sleep on the floor. After the fall of the Taliban, the healthcare system in Afghanistan was decimated, and the mental health wards of a women's clinic completely filled with feces and urine. Dealing with child labor around the world where young children turn over bricks because they're light enough to turn them over to dry and yet not getting an education. This is what we do to ourselves, the landscape of war. This is what war looks like and how we annihilate the surfaces of our living in a really bad place to park. The really strange thing is how we actually fight and why we don't get along. When I was following the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan, fighting the Taliban, at the call to prayers and marks of tanks on the road, everybody stops fighting, killing each other, and drops down to pray, then to get up and continue the weakness of humanity. And these are the scars that we leave of humanity. People who cannot walk. Because we do this to ourselves, and why it's so important that we can collectively play a role in making change. So I want to say, yes, it's National Geographic, it's Time Magazine, it's your local newspaper. I don't care who you're screaming through or who you want to talk to. The publishing group that was up here before me, phenomenal. Phenomenal. We all have a role to play. And that's why these three things are so important. But I'm going to turn it on its head. It's not social media. It's not. It's self-publishing. Because it only becomes social when we interact with each other. That's when it's social. And I'll try to share you why. So when I publish every day on Instagram. I publish, and usually the most simple pictures get the most engagement. But when people comment, and I'll show you a little bit later. So, okay, 17,000 likes. So you ever sat and picked up a magazine at a newsstand? And maybe you know this, but I want to try to humanize this thing called social media so you understand the magnitude of what you can be engaged in and what you are engaged in and how you curate that engagement for issues that you care about. And they could be things like you care about shoes. Okay, we need shoes, but make it interesting, make it giving. Because when you open up a magazine, let's say you're sitting at your home, at a newsstand, or at a doctor's office, and you stop and open up that magazine page, and you stop for a few seconds at that photograph, you're liking it. That's a like. So think of these likes as actually somebody stopped and cared for what you created. 17,088 people, and it's probably grown since then, since April 15th of this year, engaged in this photograph of a young girl who has no access to mirrors in the Afar region of Ethiopia, about women's issues, about empowerment, and about neglect. I did a story for National Geographic that came out this April on why we don't get along, why we hate each other, us versus them. And I went to Rwanda to look at genocide 23 years later. 8,500 engagements. I get a lot of hate. I've had my life threatened countless times on social media, on self-publishing. But I take it and I engage in it. This probably received 200 comments. Now, these are letters to the editor. Somebody actually went beyond just liking, and I comment back on every comment that you discuss with me, and I had this endless debate with somebody who only wanted to foster hatred. But I wasn't going to let that person gain on hatred. I wanted to enlighten that person to be another ambassador of change. And so I engage in every discussion, because that's a letter to the editor. So remember, stopping at an image is liking it. When somebody takes a pen to paper in traditional publishing days, that was writing a letter to the editor, because you are the publisher. You are the editor. Somebody gave you their time. Give them back your time, because then it's social. Then you're empowering, then you're engaging, and yes, you're making change. It's tremendously powerful. Look to partner with entities. So you may say, oh, I only have 200 subscribers, and don't call them followers. They're not following anything. They are subscribing to you. They believe in you. They believe in you. And how powerful and incredible is that? Give to them. I don't know if anybody knows this guy, Gary Vaynerchuk, super brilliant person in regards to engagement and really what we're doing today in publishing. He wrote a whole book called The Thank You Economy. Make sure you read it if you get a chance. We are here to give thanks for the ability to communicate. We're acts of givers. And look to partner with people to expand your subscribership. Now, how many people follow the Nat Geo account on Instagram? So I don't know if you all know this, but we are the ones who publish those images ourselves. I have the passcodes right here. I could give it to you if you'd like, but I'll get into a heap of load of trouble. I'm able to communicate to 88.6 million fellow human beings. That's a partnership that, yes, you build, but there are other partnerships that you can reach out to as well. Anybody who's photographers here? And you don't have to be a photographer. Who's a photographer? Okay, great. The George Soros and the Open Society looks to empower photographers. You can take over their account and reach how many people? 182,000 subscribers. They actually pay you for it. So look for partnerships to expand your reach and dialogue. It's publishers partnering. You're a publisher, and you're partnering with another publisher. I don't believe in gender, borders. Sorry, I just don't. Race. We're all the same. My blood can go into yours and yours into me. How are we any different? But yes, we need to empower people who've been disenfranchised for ridiculously too long, and that happens to be women. If you're a photographer, join the Women Photograph group on Instagram. Take over their account. Look to do takeovers of other people's account. You know, I follow the Go Viral account here on Instagram. Who runs that here? Is a person here who's running that? Okay, I want to talk to you on how you even make it more beautiful. You should every day have somebody who's a panelist here or somebody take over that account, expand on it, dialogue with it. Make this photographer right over here who raised his hand. Give it to that photographer for 5 hours, right? And communicate. Those are partnerships to have. Now this is really interesting. Timur, who's really one of the main people behind this event, turned me on last night to what he's doing. He has adamdar.ca, and here he's telling the story of Kazakhstan and the Stans and the Caucasus. He's looking for partnerships. He's looking to expand dialogue through visual communication. So if you're looking to expand your reach, yes, you want to have that. And don't do this for ego. I don't care if you have 10 subscribers. If they really believe in you, that's intense. I want you to go and give to them. But I know you want to expand your subscribership. It really works through partnerships. And here's how it actually works. Now, again, I do have this incredible kind ability to work with National Geographic. So I'll publish this photograph from Andijan in Uzbekistan and get a very thankful 6,500 engagements. And then I'll publish the same image on National Geographic, and I'll get 314,000 engagements. That's an incredible power to have. Not power for me, but power for communication. Even at 6,000 engagements, this next image here from the Rohingya crisis last year out of Myanmar into Bangladesh, I had 9,700 engagements, a huge amount of dialogue under this image, about 200-300 letters to the editor, which I answered almost all of them. I spent about an hour or two a day engaging with my subscribers. But so even at 9,700, that's more than most local newspapers in North America. That's incredibly powerful. Now imagine if you do a partnership and that same image can have almost 300,000 engagements. That's more subscribers than the New York Times. Power to communicate on issues that you believe in. Now, most people don't want to deal with heavy situations. They don't want to deal with suffering. They want to deal with uplifting things. And I get it. And I try to dance in both places. But I'll be honest, I have an entire agenda going on, and I'm not going to lie. I'm here to make you think. And I'm going to be a dog on a bone, never giving up on that until we all collectively turn the wheel of change, because I can't do it myself. But once in a while, I'll just do a simple picture. It's so simple. I was coming back from this massive influx of nearly 1,000 people desperate to live, waiting for a ferry boat, and it's just a pretty sunset thing. Almost over 25,000 engagements on my own subscribership. People like pretty things, and I get it. But again, I want to hear it. I want to noodle your head. Take the same picture to go to National Geographic. Nearly 1 million engagements. Incredible power through partnerships. So I can't stress enough, look at partnerships to expand your communication. Again, whether you're here, that you're impassioned about shoes or cars or technology or life or issues that you believe in. Just a bit more on how it works in these partnerships. That gentleman who lost his job in the Mangostar region, 157,000 engagements. That wedding, another 150,000. So I want you to go further, though. We can go further, and Timur is doing that. And I'm always, trying to push it as well. How many people do Instagram stories here? Good. So important. Do expanding beyond just yourself, create entities. So I did this project after my time between Palestinian and Israeli teenagers. I've done a lot of work in the Caucasus on genocide. And that's a heavy topic, I know. Who's right, who's wrong, good God. I don't want to go there. Anything I ever publish on it, I get endless amounts of hate. But I don't care. I'm going to stand up to it because hate begets hate. And that's what we have to stop. So I started a project called Bridging Stories. Bridging Stories to bridge apart indifference. You can follow it on bridging.stories on Instagram. I was sitting on the Turkish side of the river that separates Armenia and Turkey, and it was raining, and I was in tears looking at the 17th century bridge that used to connect two beautiful nations. And I was doing this very heavy story, probably the heaviest story of my life. And I said, there has to be a way to do this, because I'm going to publish this story to 20-some million readers in this publication called National Geographic, but will it change anything? So I had this idea that I was going to empower 24 young photographers, 12 in Turkey and 12 in Armenia, to tell their own stories. Because I've seen, as I showed you before, far too much. And it's still the same madness that I'm photographing, because it has to come from within. And so we started Bridging Stories. We have over 13,000 subscribers. These young photographers are still publishing today on this feed, even though the project's over. It's looking like we're going to do part 2. This was funded by the U.S. State Department, which is also a lot of why we're here. So give thanks that we're doing something, something beautiful for diplomacy and for peace. And honestly, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't like that. But we did this project. We never gave geographic references. We did it as diptychs and triptychs, where you don't know which border it is. I don't, again, believe in borders that divide us. And I know there's maybe some issues here in this part of the world. We're all sisters and brothers. Borders divide us. I get why we have them, but only humans create this crazy thing called borders. And you know what? They change all the time. How crazy. So these young photographers told their own stories. And it was so powerful, so giving and beautiful. It turned into an exhibition in 2 different countries. And the way we presented the exhibitions, we covered the captions, so you, again, did not know which border, which region of the country, of either Armenia or Turkey that it came from, so that you can feel our human commonality. It talked about who they were. Not me talking about them, or me trying to be the foreigner who comes in thinking that I know everything. I know nothing. I'm learning everything every moment. But it comes from within. And it went even further. It became a book. And it's a book that's still circulating today. Copies are in circulation all the time. And again, we're going to expand Bridging Stories, I believe, into part 2. And I would love to see the stands, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, work as another means of bridging stories together. If anybody wants to start that here, I'd be more than happy to get engaged, guide you through it, empower you through it, because stories come from within. We can come in, I can come in, you can come in, think that we can figure it out, but it comes from within. That's where change happens. It comes from empowerment, because everybody has a story to tell. Nobody is more important than the other. You have a story to tell. A farmer has a story to tell. A banker has a story to tell. A weaver has a story to tell. We all have something to tell. And that's where I was saying before, I'm sorry, who's on Instagram Stories. Instagram Stories is incredibly powerful to tell these vignettes as another means of communication. Now, I don't know how your stories are embraced, but when my stories are running, algorithms, and I don't understand algorithms from biorhythms to any rhythm of even my heart, but the engagement is powerful. When I was in Bangladesh covering the Rohingya crisis, I published this story, and thank you so much for correcting the color. Now her colors are not so crazy. I did this Instagram story. I do stories all the time. If you follow me on Instagram, I did a little story flying here yesterday, waking up this morning. I try to make stories that are curated. I do not film them and publish instantly. I actually film them and put them in my camera roll, and I curate them. And we can talk about that later if you want, or you can pull me aside on how you actually make short films on Instagram. So this is a little bit long, but this is all just one day. And this is how I like to communicate on issues even further than just working on my own Instagram feed and for the magazine. And just to let you know, this story on my Instagram story had over 20,000 views. It ran also on the Nat Geo feed with nearly 2 million views. Can you turn up the sound? Is there sound? Even louder if you can. And I mean, I'll talk a little bit over this. Here I am. I'm a filmmaker as well. I make films. I've absolutely fallen in love with vertical video. It's such a bizarre format. And when you're publishing stories on your self-publishing feeds, you're talking in single moments, right? Which are what we are as photographers, moments that really tap our consciousness. But people love this sort of background detail on how these moments build, have about how they happen. 20 to 30 Rohingya refugees on it. They're making it. Water's still pretty shallow here. Sometimes I'll run a piece painfully longer than it should be. Sometimes less is more on an Instagram story, but I wanted you to see every person on this raft. I wanted you to feel so uncomfortable that you could place yourself on there. And there's ways in Instagram stories, because I know it's 15 seconds long, to splice them together. From this story, and it wasn't my intention, I was very thankful, thousands of dollars were raised for 2 NGOs that I had connections with. For the last 20 years, I've been focusing heavily on migration, but specifically forced migration. There's never been more displaced people on our planet than today. And my next National Geographic story later this year is on mega cities. And it's not mega cities like New York City or Hong Kong. It's mega displacement camps. I'll be going to northern Uganda, where 300,000 people are displaced. The interesting thing about vertical video is we're consuming so much with this. So imagine you're creating and you're consuming on this most powerful tool we've ever had. And so then, of course, on the magazine side, this is what we run in the magazine. So it's these lateral stories that I love to tell as Instagram stories. And of course, we can save them now, right? You make sure you save your stories. They're a permanent repertoire of anything that you're engaged in. Save them all. That's that full frame of the children fighting for food. So how can we actually change the world? Well, it's by actions that you're obviously here to do something like that. I don't think you guys came here, right? You're not just wanting to go viral. That's really nice and important. But I think you're here to engage in something. There was a gentleman here earlier. He has this bark or brank, where he's empowering people through startups around the planet, and very interesting speech and presentation. But I want to you know this already. The most empowering thing we have today is this camera that makes phone calls. And you got to look at this thing in my hand and in your hand. I actually have two of them. I have another one in the back of my pocket. I sometimes do 2-camera Instagram stories, which is really interesting if you want to know a little bit about that. Oh, God, I got 15 minutes? Oh, I don't know if I have enough time. Well, here's using an iPhone 5 making a short film. I'm going to move really quick after this.
Unmarked horizons of the
This is using an entire film just with its power in your hand.
crossroads of the Middle East. It was a bit like coming out of a two-dimensional world into one that had many dimensions. It's a change from Bedouin culture to much more diverse Middle Eastern cultures. Palestinian peoples, Israelis, Syrians, Jordanians. I've got to think that part of the problem is that this tiny region, which causes us so much heartache, is anything but promised. The commonality of the cultures here is what struck me. Despite being a checkerboard, despite being contested, despite being embattled, the hospitality, the spirit, the passion, and toughness of the people who live here unites them more than they would ever know. They're just people. And when you slow down and walk through people's lives, through their living rooms and shops, through their places of worship, this is what you see.
So why is storytelling so important? I've shared a little bit about it, but I want to show you again why we need to do this. Everyone has a story to tell. All of you do, and everyone you meet. The Indian Ocean tsunami hit, killing nearly 1 million people around the planet. There were 7,000 people living in this village. These are the 30-some people that survived, praying in a mosque, moving forward, never giving up. to end war and indifferent child soldiers having their legs shot off and now in a camp for rehabilitation. How do we deal with population growth? We are 7.4 billion people on the only place we can live, this planet. In 25 years, we are going to be 9 billion with nowhere else to live. Now imagine trying to be able to work on a topic or an issue to bridge indifference. Fighting for food. How will we afford affordable food? Fighting for bread, government-subsidized bread at the Great Pyramids of Egypt and Giza. Malnutrition is still rampant on our planet. How do we feed ourselves affordably? South Sudan. We're burning the Amazon at the most alarming rate on our planet ever in all time. The Amazon's the lungs of our planet for oxygen. Illegal burns regularly because we have a growing population. They're making more soybean fields so that this ship bringing 16 metric tons, and I don't know what that means, but it's a hell of a lot of soybeans, to an economy that's beautifully exploding to China because they're eating more meat. We're diverting food that used to go into our stomachs into the stomachs of animals and into our cars as alternative fuel. We've polluted our water in order to try to grow more food in the northern Punjab region of India, creating enormous amounts of birth defects and cancer. We have diseases that still kill us more than anything else. Malaria. In Zambia, a mother carried her child for 3 days to get to this clinic, or else it would have died. We have so many issues we need to work on. Momina from Eritrea was starving and not producing breast milk, and her child was dying just when sorghum had arrived, but it was too late. We've got a lot of things to work on the only place we can live. And we can use this thing called self-publishing, social media, as a monumental means of change. We're dealing with climate change across our planet. In Ethiopia, people are praying for rain because they haven't had rain in over 2.5 years. Their crops have dried up and their livestock are dying. We have the largest migration of displacement on our planet. This is in Djibouti, through an ancient pathway that we've been walking since we walked out of Africa some 60,000 years ago. Countless people die along the way for hope and opportunity. When we look for hope and opportunity, we jump on a plane. But millions are in movement and migration. And we're using technology to connect ourselves to the only thing that's stable, our families. We're building borders and indifference and hatred against each other that has to end. We have to find our commonality. We have to find less extreme approaches of how we treat each other. I went to the border with Turkey and Syria when ISIS was coming into a village in Syria. It was the largest mass migration of humanity since the fall of the Ottoman Empire. 150,000 people fleeing safety into Turkey in a 72-hour period. I met Mohammed, who'd been living in this camp for 2 years, who had planted grass seeds to remind him of his farm in Aleppo, using scissors to cut his grass. And hatred and division in North America has never been more acute, as fighting for extreme beliefs. And if you're different, you're going to pay the price. The legacy of war, the landscapes of war. Divisions of labor where we build walls, Palestinian workers being treated like animals trying to work in Israel. And we're building more walls, not only in this part of the world, but along the US-Mexico border. The footprint that we're leaving on our planet is no longer just our feet, but plastic that takes years to disintegrate. And through change and through education and through awareness, I firmly believe that we can make peace and understanding. So that one day we can see, as this case, Jews and Muslims praying together here in the tomb of King David, where there's hope, where there's opportunity, and where there's no longer starvation. We'll always have problems, and we're making headway. But you here and all of us can make change. I don't care if it's in shoes again, or purses, or cars, but give of yourself and give of the passion. Be a dog on a bone, be relentless, but give in kindness and humility. Because there's nothing like forgiveness. Boniface killed all of Maria's children during the genocide in Rwanda, and she forgave him to move forward. We all can play our part. And we can use this thing called self-publishing and just our human existence, because you have to give back your existence. We're here to do something. And I'm here to give you that love and fire, because I can't do it myself. We have to do it together. Thank you so much.